Lonnie, it's as usual, it is nighttime here and you're sipping your breakfast coffee or post-breakfast? Is it post-breakfast? Did you have your breakfast?
No, as a matter of fact, I haven't, but I will shortly after we get done here. But yeah, good morning from here and good evening to there, I guess.
Good evening. We normally, that's the best part of India is we say namaste. Now that is time neutral, right? So we can say namaste at any point of time. We do namaste by welcoming. We say namaste by see you again. Okay, so namaste and welcome to Dr. M's vodcast. And this would be the 19th episode. And thank you very much for being here with me.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I enjoy these immensely. Thank you.
So Lani, today we are going to talk about the Kaizen mindset. We hear a lot about it from you. This is you, Lani. I mean, I have to do this formality of introducing you.
Oh, sure.
Being the principal consultant of quality consultants and a lovely website that you have over there and a lot of articles which are there, which I really enjoyed. And you had 20 years as Chevron, and last episode you mentioned what Chevron was into, so we have a feel of that. Mechanical, chemical engineering, and there you are, El Paso. We talked a lot about El Paso last time, so love to come over there. Love to come over there. Let's see when that happens. And you promised me a lunch at I forget the name.
Rosa's Cantina.
Yes, that's where you're going to take me for lunch. Okay. So this is a book that I have read, and that's what we would be talking about, the Kaizen mindset. This is the reference that I have. And these are all the books that you have written, 5 of them, and some are translated into Chinese. And you told me last time that one of the books that were being taught in universities were sustaining workforce engagement and lean manufacturing. That's what you told me last time.
Yeah, both of them are used in several colleges and universities.
Great. So there you are. This is Dr. M's vodcast. We're not talking about the implementation. We're looking at the support and sustenance part of the continuous improvement movement. Over to you, Lani. Let's talk about Kaizen mindset. Let's hear from you.
Okay, you have you turned the screen over to me?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. When people think of the Kaizen mindset, they automatically think of an intellectual thing, a thing associated with your mind. But in fact, the Kaizen mindset is a very behavioral thing. If you have a Kaizen mindset, you do certain things. And there we go, pardon me. And so we're going to talk about the behaviors of the Kaizen mindset. And the Kaizen mindset is this. It's very simple. Every process can be improved. Period. End of discussion. Every process can be improved. And furthermore, everyone will work cooperatively to improve these processes every day. It's not some of the processes will be improved sometimes by some of the people. It is every process by everyone every day. That's what the Kaizen mindset is. Okay. Now let's translate this into behavior, but let's first look at the concept of whether this is an interesting concept or this is really relevant. Okay. To be relevant, it must drive behavior. Okay. Which we're going to discuss here. The 5 behaviors that manifest a Kaizen mindset. In other words, people can say they have a Kaizen mindset, but I like to say, if you went to their plant and it so happened that the Kaizen mindset was an illegal behavior, it was illegal, it was against the law,
Mhm.
Could you find enough evidence to convict those people?
Mhm.
And so you do that by observing what the people are doing.
Can I hold you there for a minute, Lonnie?
Certainly.
Yeah, I like this concept because the mindset is something that people can't see, right? But behavior is something that can be observed, right? So
Exactly.
translating a mindset into behavior is showing us the behaviors can be seen, the mindset cannot be seen. So, I mean, I like this uh, of mindset being related to the behavior part of it.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, let's take a look at a very practical example of what a Kaizen mindset might look like in plant metrics. Okay. So let's say we've got some parameter. By the way, are my slides changing, Dr. M?
Yeah, it is. It is.
Okay. Okay, very good. But let's say we've got some parameter and we plot it on the y-axis, and on the x-axis we have time.
Mhm.
It could be profitability, it could be productivity, it could be rate, it could be any parameter that's important that you want to improve upon.
Mhm.
Okay. So the first step of the Kaizen mindset is you have to have a standard.
Mhm.
There has to be a goal. There has to be an objective. Okay. Then you begin your process and you work to attain that standard. You try to prove it out. You try to reach the standard.
Mhm.
Okay. And then over time you execute the standard.
Mhm.
But as life will always have it, it
Mhm.
will deteriorate. The process will deteriorate.
Mhm.
Okay. And at that point, you need to perform maintenance. Now, maintenance is different than improvement.
Mhm. Mhm.
Maintenance is restoring to an initial condition.
Mhm.
Improvement is to improve above a standard.
Mhm.
Okay. But all processes require maintenance. So we'll perform some maintenance. Okay. And then we work on it. And that's what Kaizen looks like in theory. A nice straight line improving off into the future.
Mhm.
And every time you make an improvement, you have a new standard.
Mhm.
Okay. Unfortunately, that's not what Kaizen looks like in real life.
Mhm.
In real life, Kaizen looks like that.
Mhm.
And we call that the hairball effect. You'll do experiments, you will test things. Sometimes you'll make progress, sometimes you won't, sometimes you go backwards, sometimes you go forward. But overall,
Mhm.
you're headed in that direction.
Mhm.
You're making progress on the continuous scale. Okay?
Mhm.
And herein lies one of the real problems with Kaizen
Mhm.
is that managers are very open to the fact that you're going to improve it.
Mhm.
But if you try to improve it and you fail,
Mhm.
very often, instead of saying, well, nice try, Dr. M, that was a good try, it just didn't work, very often you get reprimanded for it.
Mhm.
And that creates a thing that does not promote psychological safety.
Mhm.
If you want to have a Kaizen mindset, people have to feel free to experiment. And if you experiment, you're going to make mistakes.
Mhm.
Those are just realities of life.
Mhm.
And so all of these things play together to make a Kaizen mindset. There's a famous quote by Taiichi Ono, and he says, without standards, there can be no Kaizen.
Mhm.
Okay. So people will come into a plant and they'll say, oh my goodness, the lighting is very low, and they'll replace the light bulbs and they'll call that Kaizen. That's not Kaizen, that's maintenance.
Mhm.
If on the other hand, they looked at the lighting and they said, this is horrible, and they traded all the 50-watt fluorescent bulbs for 100-watt fluorescent bulbs and actually improved the lighting at the workstation, that would be an improvement. That would be Kaizen.
Mhm.
Kaizen is improvement above a standard. First, you have to attain the standard.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of people don't really understand that and appreciate it.
Mhm.
Okay. So now we're starting to talk about behaviors. We're talking about creating standards, attaining standards, executing standards. All of these are behaviors.
Mhm.
Okay. And Kaizen comes in two flavors.
Mhm.
Okay. Now I call them the large but few.
Mhm.
Okay. And the small but many. And I'm
Mhm.
going to show you those in just a minute as we
Yeah.
go through an example.
Yeah.
Okay. But this is what a process would look like if the people who were managing it had a Kaizen mindset.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
Let's move on to the large but few and the small but many. Okay. This is you probably recognize this. This is a case study that's in my book, Enlarging Your Problem Solving Footprint.
Yeah.
And this was a metric for a plant. And the metric over here is productivity.
Mhm.
Okay. And in this cell, this was a cell that had 25 people in it when they started. 25 people, big cell. They were making headrests for the Toyota RAV4, you know, the mini SUV.
Yeah.
And for that cell and that process to be productive, they had a productivity target of 100 headrests per person per day. Okay. So here we've got headrests per person per day on this scale, and here we've got time on this scale. Well, they started out at the start of production, they were at 65, well below target profitability. They did all kinds of things and struggled for 2 years, and after 2 years, they were at 80. That's where they got us involved. Okay. They were still below target productivity and hence below target profitability. They asked us to get involved, and so we did. And the first thing we did is we taught them how to do what's called a Kaizen Blitz or a Kaizen event. Or some people call it a Six Sigma project. Okay. A very engineering management intensive effort where you do all kinds of things to the process to improve it. At the end of the first week, we had gone from 80 to 188 headrests per person per day, more than doubled productivity. Okay. Now, at this point right here, I call it an inflection point.
Yeah.
And very often people have what's called a report out, and the managers get together and they say, oh my gosh, look at what we did. We went from 80 to 188. They pat everybody pats each other on the back, and then they move on to the next Kaizen event. That's the fundamental problem. Okay. But this Kaizen event here is what we call one of the few but large. There's not very many projects like that, but they're large and they're impactful and they're important. Okay? Now, when you get to this inflection point, there's two things you can do. Okay. You can persist and go into Kaizen, operator driven Kaizen. Let me see. I got our pictures here. There we go. And in this case, over the next 10 months, we improved to 304 headrests per person per day. More than almost quadrupled the productivity from where we started. Okay. Yeah. And these were all operator driven Kaizen. Okay. No more engineering studies and evaluations. It was all a bunch of small projects. And I don't know how many Kaizens were done in that 10 months, but we quit counting at 120. Now, if they had not done this operator Kaizen, this is what would have happened to the process. Okay. And this operator Kaizen consists of addressing the small but many. Okay? And when you address it like you do here versus here, then you create what's called the engagement gap. Okay. When you engage the workforce in solving these problems, okay, the gains are just huge. Not only are the gains huge, but the operators can see the need for maintenance and perform it. Okay. So that's a classic example of a Kaizen mindset. Okay. They started out, okay. And let's look at the 5 behaviors of the Kaizen mindset. And keep this picture in mind that we had there. Okay. Keep in mind that everything we do is a process, and the behaviors that result from the Kaizen mindset are to, number 1, create the standard. Okay. Now, many plants have what I call freeway standards. Okay. And a freeway standard is this. If you live in El Paso, Texas, and you're driving down the freeway is posted at 60 miles an hour. The standard is clear. It's clear as a bell. You know, every quarter mile, you can see a sign that says 60 miles an hour. Yet every man, woman, and child that's driving on the freeway is going 65, 70, 75, maybe even 80 miles an hour.
Mhm.
If you're driving 60 miles an hour, it's probably dangerous because the flow of traffic is closer to 70 or 75.
Mhm.
Okay. So you are obviously violating the standard.
Mhm.
However, if a policeman pulls you over and you're going 70 miles an hour, you're going to be furious. Everybody else is going 70 miles an hour. I've been driving 70 miles an hour forever. Why do you pull me over now? Okay.
Mhm.
That's the essence of a freeway standard.
Mhm.
And many management systems have what I call freeway standards, where they have standards that are written down, but not enforced
Mhm.
or selectively enforced.
Mhm.
The freeway standard is selectively enforced. If it comes down to the end of the month and the policeman doesn't have his quota of speeding tickets, he's going to give you a ticket. And there's nothing you can do about it. He's exactly right. Okay. But businesses do not have freeway standards. They have real standards. Okay. Next, they prove the standard. They don't just advertise it, but they demonstrate that it's doable. Okay. That usually involves a lot of work, experimentation, etc., but they prove it. Okay. The third thing is they execute the standard. They make sure that everybody complies with the standard. If they can't comply with the standard, then either A, there's something wrong with the standard, or B, there's something wrong with the system. Either one needs to be addressed. Okay. The fourth one is they maintain the standard. Just like in our graph, when the product says deteriorate, we maintain it. And the fifth step is they improve the standard. Okay. Now, in just a minute, we're going to tie operator Kaizen together with Kaizen events. But if you look at these 5 things, you find out that in the Kaizen event, we created the standard and we proved it. Okay. But then in the post Kaizen event, we maintained it and we improved upon it. Okay. So these 2 things go together like a hand goes into a glove.
Yeah.
You cannot be successful with this operator driven Kaizen unless you have the Kaizen event. And the Kaizen event will not be successful in the long term unless you have this post Kaizen activity.
Wow.
Okay.
That's
So it's not like you need Kaizen events or you need operator driven Kaizen. You need both.
good. Yeah.
They
Yeah.
work together. They fit like a hand fits in a glove.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, one of the problems that the lean effort had is for years, and even persisting today, businesses do these Kaizen events and they call that lean manufacturing. And if you look at the Kaizen events, you can find that they made substantial changes. Okay. But there's 2 problems with it. Okay. One is the improvement stops at that point. And number 2, as a matter of fact, the deterioration starts at that point. So the Kaizen event is a necessary but not sufficient technique for continuous improvement. Okay. But the Kaizen event is extremely important. Okay. So let's talk about what the Kaizen event brings to the party, so to speak. Okay. The superficial reason for doing the Kaizen Blitz or the Kaizen event or the Six Sigma project, they're fundamentally the same thing, is to make large improvements. But it's an event. It's not continuous improvement. It's an event. Okay. It may be a very profitable and very substantial event, but it's an event. Okay.
It's large but few.
Yes, large but few. And I like to say this concept is both short-term in terms of its gains and short-sighted in terms of its purpose.
I like this. I like this. Yes.
Okay. Now, the healthy reason to do the Kaizen event is to set the stage for maintenance and operator-driven Kaizen, to set the stage for continuous improvement. Okay. And there are several major factors that you do. When you do the Kaizen event, and then you turn it over to the operators, and you turn it over properly by training them and setting the stage. Number 1, you transfer the process knowledge to them. In a Kaizen event, when the Kaizen team leaves, the engineers and managers leave, there's not necessarily any transfer of knowledge.
Just
But
one,
if you,
can I just hold you there just for a second
sure,
for getting this clear? The Kaizen event are done by the engineers, supervisors, correct? And they
yes, they're very, very
involvement
technical oriented.
is technically oriented, done by the engineers and supervisors, but not by the operators.
Very seldom. They may participate in it,
Uh-huh.
but, but,
But the thrust is
yes,
by
you're
the
correct.
engineers is a more of a technical thing that gives you the scalability to a higher level. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay.
We like to say that the Kaizen events are engineering intensive.
Okay, that makes it much more clearer. Okay.
Okay.
Mhm.
But if you do not follow that up immediately with operator driven Kaizen, you
Mhm.
haven't transferred the process knowledge that you gained in doing the Kaizen event.
Mhm. Mhm.
The second thing is you haven't transferred process control over to them. This team comes in, makes all these changes, and then gives it to the operators and says, here, now do with it. Okay?
Mhm.
The third thing the Kaizen event does not doesn't create, is it doesn't transfer what I call informed ownership.
Mhm.
Okay. Now these people now have some characteristics. They can see the flow. They've got embedded tests, and we'll talk about those in just a second. The 7 critical aspects of a Kaizen event. Okay. But now they have informed ownership. Okay. And if you have done it right, you
Mhm.
have created an environment
Mhm.
where all of these operators,
Mhm.
all of the people working in that cell
Mhm.
can perform and become the best versions of themselves. They
Mhm.
can create activity. They can show competence.
Mhm.
They can make improvements.
Mhm.
Now, this is all described
Mhm.
by completing what I call the critical list of 7.
Yeah.
The critical list of 7. These are 7 things that you need to accomplish in a Kaizen event.
Mhm.
Okay. Let's jump to that.
Sure.
Okay. The critical list of 7.
Mhm.
Okay. And this list is in my book,
Mhm.
Enlarging Your Problem Solving Footprint.
Yes.
Okay. Now, the first thing is you establish work rules which support lean. Okay.
Mhm.
In this cell, when we first started with this cell, it was incredibly chaotic.
Mhm.
The cell made headrests, and there were 5 headrests.
Mhm.
There was 2 front headrests, which were identical.
Mhm.
There were 2 outside rear headrests, which were
Mhm.
identical but different from the front. Okay.
Mhm.
And then there was a center rear headrest, which
Mhm.
was called a flip fold.
Mhm.
And that's where the headrest would flip down. You'd
Mhm.
pull a little plug, and the headrest would flip down, so the driver would have better vision out the rear window.
Yeah.
And so there were five part numbers, and each one of those part numbers could be made in one of 8 different colors,
Mhm.
or of cloth, 8 different cloth colors, and 2 different colors of leather. So there are actually 50 different part numbers that were made in this cell,
Mhm.
and they were made simultaneously.
Mhm.
Well, they had no work rules on how to do them, and so they would just start, one color at one workstation, then they'd start another color at another workstation,
Mhm.
and when they were done, they had no control over the workflow. Okay,
Mhm.
and when you looked at that cell,
Mhm.
the first time we went to the floor and counted, they had 720 headrests in process.
Mhm.
To put it in perspective, when
Mhm.
we finished, there were 60.
Mhm.
We reduced the in process and the flow from 720 to 60. Okay.
Mhm.
The second thing you need to do is you need to implement standard work. Okay. Now they had documents that listed the standard work,
Mhm.
but if you compared what the people were doing to the documents,
Mhm.
any correlation between the two was purely coincidental at best. Okay. The third thing that they have to do on a Kaizen event is you want to improve the flow.
Mhm.
Okay. So we establish work rules in this Kaizen event. Okay.
Mhm.
We implemented standard work. Okay.
Mhm.
And before the people came back, we trained everybody on the standard work, and then we improved the flow.
Mhm.
And improving the flow is to have clear pathways for the product to flow. Okay.
Mhm.
And one of the ways you do that is you reduce the inventory.
Yeah.
But they had other things that we needed to do. For example, one of the work rules that we implemented was we set up Kanban stations,
Mhm.
and once the Kanban was filled, they had to stop production.
Mhm.
These people were not used to doing that, not used to doing
Mhm.
that at all. In
Mhm.
other words, one of the great wastes that Ono talks about is overproduction.
Mhm.
And they had overproduction on the floor. They
Mhm.
had, instead of having 60 pieces on the floor, they had 720. So they
Mhm.
were just drowning in pieces.
Mhm.
Okay. So you improve the flow,
Mhm.
you create transparency. Okay. Now, all of those things are very engineering intensive things.
Mhm.
For example, on the transparency,
Mhm.
you want to be able to see. For example, there was a workstation where they prepared the headrest itself.
Mhm.
Okay. And then it went to another process where they filled the headrest with foam.
Mhm.
Well, we wanted them to prepare enough headrests, but not too many. And
Mhm.
so there was a conveyor that took the headrest to the molding operation.
Mhm.
And on that conveyor, we color coded it, red, yellow, green.
Mhm.
Okay. And when they got to red, that meant there was an emergency. They were going to starve the downstream process.
Mhm.
When it was yellow, that meant they were in trouble. And when it was green, it meant that was perfect.
Mhm.
Okay. And so now the operator could see the process. They could see what was going on.
Mhm.
With the Kanban squares were in place, they could see if they had supplied their downstream customer properly. So now the operators can see the process and they can distinguish good from bad.
Mhm.
Okay. The fifth thing we did was create embedded tests.
Mhm.
Okay. And those are tests so the value operator can see if the process is operating normally or abnormally. Okay.
Mhm.
One of the simple tests was that when they were filling up these headrests, they had several molds in series.
Mhm.
We put a clock up there,
Mhm.
and to reach tack time, it
Mhm.
was supposed to take 72 seconds maximum to fill these headrests. Well, for some reason, it took longer than that. They got an alarm. Okay.
Mhm.
That was an embedded test in the process that told them that something in the process had failed.
Mhm.
Okay. Again, those are engineering kind of things.
Mhm.
The sixth thing was we needed to create an escalation process.
Mhm.
One of the work rules we gave them
Mhm.
was that they could not break the flow.
Mhm.
Okay. We also told them they could not pass bad work forward.
Mhm.
Okay. So now if a worker made a defective product and he knew it, he was stuck. He couldn't do anything else with it. It had to follow the flow,
Mhm.
but he couldn't pass bad work forward. So he needed help. Okay. So we created an and-on system where he could turn on a light and immediately the team leader would come over and say, okay, how can I help you with his processes? Okay. And the lights also would call maintenance if they needed it, or parts if they needed it, or tooling if they needed it. Okay. That's an escalation process so that their problems could be solved in real time.
Mhm.
Okay. Then the seventh thing is kind of a complicated one, and I thought not even bringing this up, but it's rather important.
Sure.
But the whole organization runs on a principle called the four competencies. Pardon me, the four competencies of execution,
Mhm.
and we make that the cultural norm for the entire facility. Okay.
Mhm.
Now these seven things
Mhm.
need to be created in a Kaizen event or somewhere. It doesn't have to be a Kaizen event. It can be just, you don't need to call it an event. You just need to supply those seven things. The
Mhm.
workers need work rules. They need standard work. They need flow. They need transparency. They need embedded tests, and they need an escalation process.
Mhm.
Okay. They need the work rules to know how to do and what to do it. Same with standard work. They need the flow to stay up with the production demands. They need transparency to see if things are right or wrong. They need embedded testing to evaluate whether abnormal or normal.
Mhm.
And they need an escalation process when there's problems bigger than they can fix. We wrap all of those up and we call it the four competencies of execution.
Mhm.
Okay. This is getting kind of intense. So if you got some questions, don't hesitate to ask.
Well, but I'm flowing with you. I'm flowing with you.
Okay. Okay. But the thing here is
Mhm.
the Kaizen mindset requires
Mhm.
that you create these standards. It requires that you prove these standards. And here we're talking about the standards.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, the four competencies of execution
Yeah.
are the end result of a broad range of skills and activities requiring input from everyone in the organization.
Mhm.
Everyone in the organization,
Mhm.
and their purpose is to guide and support
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
value-added operator's activity. When we teach this, pardon me, Doctor, when we teach this, we teach a concept called the surgeon's concept. The value-add operator on the floor is like a surgeon in the operating room. Everything is dependent upon his activities.
Mhm.
If he does his job well, he will make a good part just in time, and you'll satisfy your customer with good parts on time.
Mhm.
If he does not,
Mhm.
then you've got a problem. But the value added operator needs a lot of support. He needs materials, he needs instructions, he needs problem solving assistance, all of those things he needs. And it's everybody else's job in the organization to supply that. So we say he's like the pilot in an airplane, or he's like the surgeon in the operating room. Everything comes to him exactly as he needs it, when he needs it, in the shape that he needs it. Okay. Well, those four competencies are that across the whole organization, we pre-specify everything in terms of both results, factors that need to be accomplished, and means, methods to accomplish those. So the pre-specification here is the standards and the methods. Okay. To support the value-added operator's activity, we have embedded tests so he can distinguish normal from abnormal, good from bad. Okay. And then he is required to act on the abnormal.
Mhm.
He can't take bad parts and pass them on. Anything that's abnormal, if the process deteriorates, he needs to act on it. If he can't meet his tack time, he needs to act on it. Now, he may be able to fix it himself, or he may need to escalate it. But regardless, he needs to act on it.
Mhm.
Okay. And the fourth thing is, once he's got everything normal and everything's going, the question is, how can we improve this? How
Yeah.
do we seek the ideal state? Okay.
Mhm.
Now, these are all parts of continuous improvement. You
I
can't
just
seek the
hold you there.
ideal.
Just hold you there. These four of them for execution. If you permit me to use management jargon called accountability, responsibility, whatever you want to put it, is that of the frontline supervisors, middle level managers, top managers, or all of them put together?
Actually, Dr. M, this is everybody.
Mhm.
Because let's take, for example, a work cell. A
Mhm.
work cell has a production standard to meet.
Mhm.
Okay. So the production people are responsible for it. When they make parts, the parts have to be shipped off. So there's a logistics organization, and the
Mhm.
logistics organization have to have standards and processes.
Mhm.
Okay. And then there's the job of the supervisor, and there's the job of the team leader, and there's the job of the operator.
Mhm.
And when they have problems and it needs to be escalated, maybe they need the team leader, maybe they need the supervisor, maybe they need engineering help, maybe they need help from maintenance or tooling or fixturing. Everybody is involved in these four competencies of execution.
Mhm.
Everybody is responsible to do their job.
Mhm.
The job of the value add operator is to make the parts just in time. The job of everyone else is to support him or her. And so everybody has some methods, some means that they need to accomplish. Okay.
Mhm.
The maintenance organization to make sure the equipment is good,
Mhm.
and even, the janitor to make sure that things are clean.
Mhm.
Everybody.
I think that's the toughest part, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. This is a facility-wide set of competencies.
I'm just asking you because we covered in the previous episode about change agent. Are you weird enough? So just relating it to that, to ensure that these four are done, who has to take the call, or in what we say, who has to bell the cat?
Well, it starts at the very top, Doc, and there's standards at the very top of the organization. We might call them plant metrics of profitability, on-time delivery, quality, that type of stuff. And then at the production level, there's a different set of metrics. At the value stream level, at the cell level, and whoever is in charge of that level is responsible to make sure that those metrics are met. And if they can't, okay, then they act on the normal, okay. And if they can meet it, they say, hey, can we improve it? Here's where the weirdness comes in, of course, when they want to change things. Okay. But yeah, everybody in the organization is responsible. And that's one of the things, as a matter of fact, responsible is just that. It's the ability to respond. Can the people at every level actually respond? Okay. And when you provide these things, these 7 things to the value add operator, the value add operator can respond. Yeah. Right. He can do all the things he needs to do. If he has trouble, he escalates it, and he's got help there. Okay. So the operator is responsible, the team leader is responsible, the supervisor is responsible, each for their unique area of responsibility. Yeah. Okay. But the point is, they can respond. It's not a matter of knowing that things are bad. It's that, can you decide that things are bad, and then can you do something about it? And that's the essence of lean manufacturing. That's one of the brilliant pieces that they built into the Toyota production system, is that everybody can fix something. And they empower the people to do that. Okay. Now to get there, we need to go through some paradigm shifts. Now, these paradigm shifts might be different in different organizations, but from what I've seen in wandering around the United States, Canada, Mexico, China, various European countries, they're all pretty much the same. Okay. And keep in mind that what we want to do is we want to create a Kaizen mindset. And the Kaizen mindset is that every process can be improved. Okay. And everyone will work cooperatively to improve these processes every day. It's not some processes. It's not sometimes or some people. It's everybody. The engineers may do the Kaizen event. The operators are doing the operator Kaizen. Okay. Meanwhile, everybody else is supporting the operator. Okay. Now, the Kaizen mindset mantra is every process, everyone, every day. Every process, everyone, every day. Easy to remember. Every process, everyone, every day. Okay. Now, of these, there's 9 paradigm shifts that I'm gonna go through with you. Yeah. And each one alone is so important that if you don't fight through this paradigm shift and shift it, change it. These are thoughts that must be changed. And they include, the first one was when this stuff first hit the United States, was the Kaizen mindset is a Japanese thing. Okay. It's not a Japanese thing. I mean, the word Kaizen is Japanese. There's no question about that. But there's nothing Japanese about continuous improvement. Nothing Japanese about it at all. And people like to say that, and then that gives them an excuse. Well, we're not in Japan. So, if we don't do it so well, you need to cut us a little slack. That's a bunch of baloney. One of my favorite authors is a guy named Richard Schonberger. And he said, techniques travel well.
I'll repeat that. Techniques travel well. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he said they cross language barriers, they cross cultural barriers, they cross physical barriers, they travel well. Okay. The second thing is that Kaizen is something extra, not part of the everyday work. Okay. So many people think, well, I'll get my job done, but fixing it, improving it is the engineer's job, or improving it is the supervisor's job. It's everybody's job where they have the technical skills to improve the process. And after you have seen a Kaizen mindset in action, you can see the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of ways that the operator can participate in the improvement. That is one of the huge topics that that held up improvement in the United States for years. Was that, you know, my job is to work, somebody else's job is to improve. Okay. The third one is that the Kaizen mindset, and especially the power of operator-driven Kaizen, must be changed from an oh, by the way thing. In other words, people say, oh, by the way, we ought to be improving. Instead of that, to make it mandatory. Okay. Kaizen, and here's the trick, Dr. M.
Yeah.
You don't have to make it mandatory. If you give these operators the opportunity to improve, they will. They want to. They're ready. They're skilled.
With all the 7 supports that you mentioned earlier.
Yes, if you create that environment where it's possible for them to improve, they will. They love it. Okay. For years, they've been saying, you know, we ought to do this to make it better. We ought to do this. We ought to do this. And they've heard from their management, well, we can't do it. It would take capital money. We don't have time to do it, whatever. Okay. But when you set the stage right, now they get to contribute in a new and a different way. The fourth Kaizen mindset, and this is an absolute killer. People believe that the fewer problems we have, the better life is. Okay. The truth of the matter is, you can't improve until you have a problem. That's what you do. You fix problems. And so many people run away from problems instead of creating them. How do you create a problem? Well, you raise the standard. As soon as you raise the standard, okay, now can people create a system to meet that standard? I've got a slide set that maybe I'll send it to you. It's called, you got to learn to love problems. Problems are your friend.
Yeah, it's so nice that you mentioned it, because the minute you lift the bar or improve the standards or raise the standards, you're moving them away from their comfort zone, and therefore they would have some sort of a problem that will arise, and then you solve that to reach the higher standard. Am I right?
Exactly. And the moment you mention to these people, the moment Dr. M goes to them and say, hey, I got to move you out of your comfort zone, they're going to look at you and they're going to say, Dr. M, you're just a little weird.
Haven't I heard that for the last 2 decades? Okay.
Yeah. Now, the fifth paradigm is that the Kaizen applies to production processes only. It does not. It applies to everything. It applies to shipping and receiving. Most importantly, it applies to the big processes. I cannot give you but 2 examples in my 32 years of consulting where firms have sat down and critically reviewed their hiring process. How do we hire? I can give you only one example of a company that critically sat down and said, how do we improve our strategic planning? Now they change it from year to year, but they don't sit down and critically review it. Okay. And so they're really not doing Kaizen. They're just changing from one system to another. Okay. But Kaizen applies to all processes, everything, hiring, training, planning, buying machinery, keeping track of costs, everything, all of the costs, all of the processes. The sixth one is the Kaizen is a floor worker thing. In other words, Kaizen should be done on the production floor, but not in the office. Okay. Well, what about preparing work requests? What about writing out bill of materials? What about all the office work that needs to be done? writing reports. Those can all be Kaizen as well. They can all be improved. Okay.
You see this
The one that I like to talk about when people come up with this is, I said, the number one Kaizen you need to work on in your plant is to Kaizen your meeting management process. The biggest management waste by far in virtually every client I've ever had is management meetings.
True.
Too many of them, unfocused, no agenda, wandering off the agenda. People show up late. People don't show up. People show up unprepared. Meeting management is a disaster. And it was a disaster in Canada and the United States and Mexico. It was a disaster in China when I was there as well. But
you got the smile on my face, and is because I can recollect everything what you said. Including, I swear on you, including the concept of JET. The operators made it correct. Everything is right. You know what happens? The logistics takes over, and then the documentation takes over. Then the transportation doesn't arrive on time, and then the company, and ultimately the poor operators have to be blamed for that.
Unfortunately, that's altogether too true. Yeah.
Yes, that's what got me smiling, and I did laugh at the meeting part of it, because these days it becomes more complicated, because they have something called a smartphone in which they have to perpetually bend their head to. Sorry for that. Sorry for that intervention. Sorry.
Yeah. No problem. No problem.
The flow. So, yeah. So
the seventh paradigm shift is a real problem. And that is, all managers think what change sounds like a good idea, but don't screw up while you're doing it. Okay. Unfortunately, change always comes with risk. Okay. And so some of the changes you make will not be positive. And the management team must accept that. They must accept that. If they don't, you don't create what I call a psychologically safe workplace. If people are not comfortable, if they don't feel psychologically safe, they're not gonna suggest things that are other than slam dunks, and they're gonna miss tons and tons of opportunities.
Experience that, sir. I understand that. Experienced it. Yes, sir.
Yeah. My son had a soccer poster, and it said, you miss 100% of the shots you do not take. And you know, with every shot you take on goal, there's a risk you're gonna, you know, miss the goal completely, turn it over to the other team, whatever. But there's an appropriate risk to reward ratio, and you have to keep that in perspective. And if you tell your people, make no mistakes, and you punish them for that, you won't get innovation, you won't get creativity, you won't get engagement.
Can I just add on to, because what triggered me off is your son's poster. I worked in a public sector, and one of the chairmen said that, you know, I can't change anything because it is, sorry for that. I said, I'm sorry, I can't change anything. You know, it's a management decision. Now, then we built up a concept. We were very young those days. So we built up a concept that management always starts one level above you. So anything that you have, you lob it on them. Okay. So the chairman who handed over this to this chairman told him that, look, you can't achieve anything without sticking your head out. And he had given him a car with his head sticking out of the car. I mean, you can't play it safe all the way. I understand that part of it. I mean, we have experienced that. I like your son's poster. It's
yeah. The eighth paradigm shift is changing to a Kaizen mindset will require a new program or a new initiative. Okay. By a program, you know, with banners and announcements and all kinds of, it doesn't at all. It's just changing not what you're doing, but how you're doing it. Everybody today is going out and doing problem solving, but do they create a standard, and then do they prove the standard, and do they maintain the standard, and then do they improve upon it? Changing the Kaizen mindset is not a revolution in a business.
Mhm.
It's an evolution. Okay. And you don't need a big program with banners. And as a matter of fact, the more of that you have, the less effective it's going to be. Okay. And the ninth one is the Kaizen success is only about the results. And that is a countercultural lean thought. Lean says the best process will create the best results. So focus on the process and the results will ensue.
Yeah.
You can't manage the results literally.
Yeah,
Okay.
I remember.
So
I remember my sensei Masaki Imai saying that process yields results. That's what he used to say.
Yeah. So those are the 9 paradigm shifts that I have seen most often. Now there's others, I'm sure. And in some plants, some of these may be larger or lesser, but I find those to be very, very common in virtually everywhere I go.
Yeah. So we had to. Yeah, I mean, I understand where you're coming from, but these are the significant few that we can. I mean,
Yes.
it is across the organizations. I mean, it's across the planet Earth, and I can experience that in India. You have experienced that in Europe, China, America, Canada. I have experienced that in India and in Saudi Arabia and Muscat. So I think, and Japan probably knows about it much before we did.
Okay. Moving on.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we've talked about with the Kaizen mindset, we talked about what it is. Okay. You know, it's everyone, every process, every day. Okay. And we talked about what it looks like behaviorally. We talked about the 5 things of creating the standard, proving the standard, executing the standard, maintaining the standard, and then improving upon the standard. Okay. Those 5 things we can measure. We can measure just like we measured them on that graph that I put up there.
Yeah.
And every plant has those metrics. Okay. And then we looked at the paradigms that must be changed to achieve a Kaizen mindset. Okay. I put that in there to wrap up that portion of it before you wanted to talk about also the Kaizen mindset and how it applies to Martek's law.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. So yes.
I don't know if you want to take a break here or.
No, we carry on with this so that.
Okay, very good. Very good. Okay, you had asked me about Martek's law, and to be honest with you, Dr. M, I had just heard about it peripherally, and I'd never spent much time looking into it. And as I looked into it, I found some really, really interesting things. And to be honest with you, I'm glad you asked the question. I'm glad you asked the question.
Can we stop at this and then continue? Yeah, we stop at this, stop recording and restart it so that we convert that into a separate episode, right?